We'll get started. Okay, yeah, it's 2 minutes past, so let's go for it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming at a slightly different time of day. Welcome back to the University of Liverpool Evolutionary Anthropology webinar series. We're joined today by Professor Kristen from the University of Utah, who will be giving us a talk called Revisiting Grandmothering and the Evolution of Human Longevity. As usual, if people could just keep their microphones and cameras off for the duration of the call, just to minimize any potential disturbance. We will be having a Q&A in the last 15 minutes or so of the session. So as usual, you're welcome to either write your questions in the chat, or you can use the raised hand function and I'll call on you if you prefer to ask your question out loud. At that point, you can also put your camera on if you would like to. We will be recording this talk for YouTube, so that's just something to consider if you don't want your face or voice on YouTube. So yeah, I think that's everything, and I will hand over to Professor Hawkes now.
Thank you, Rachel. And oops, so I'm trying to talk about too many things, and so please, I'm eager for the questions. I will try not to take up all the time with just my voice, but I want to try to show that all these pieces actually have been on the table for quite a while, and recognizing they're all part of the same puzzle of us is from the perspective I'm trying to show, that makes a lot of sense, but of course it doesn't necessarily make sense to everybody. So I'm really looking forward to the questions. So I'm starting off with Jane Goodall to make the point that she put so much of this on the table so long ago. Her 1986 book summarized work that she had published before that, but Louis Leakey was brilliant enough to get her to go to Gombe, and what we learned from that is so important. And in the book, again, a lot of the stuff published before that, but she summarizes a whole bunch of features that we share with chimpanzees, and things that distinguish us. And I'm showing this phylogeny here because at that time, the notion was, well, they're all pongids, and it's just us hominids, we're separate. But now the molecular evidence has shown that really we all belong to the same hominid family, and that chimpanzees and bonobos, genus Pan, they're closer to us than they are to gorillas. And gorillas are closer to us than they are to orangutans. But the things that I'm going to underline here that Goodall described for chimpanzees are also the case for our other living hominid cousins. That in all of them, mothering is an independent thing. Mom is feeding herself and carrying the baby along. And the infants, we now have quantitative data showing that the infants actually start to pick their own food by the time they're 1 year old. And when they are finally weaned, they're feeding independently, and then she has another one. But as you all know, that is not the case for us. And the standard story about us is well before actually the 20th century, but especially elaborated in the 20th century, that actually it was hunting and paternal provisioning and the big brains that made hunting more and more successful. That is fundamentally the story of us. Well, Goodall had pointed out that actually chimpanzees hunt and males hunt more than females do. And actually, most of it is eaten by the males themselves. But then that's where this back to the big brains part of the story, that our evolution was about being smarter, having a bigger brain, and being able to get big game, and so that it's possible for a hunter to support the wife and kids, and she can pile them up instead of the one at a time thing that is what goes on with our closest cousins. And that's what we thought. That's what I thought when we mounted this project with foragers in eastern Paraguay. My students at the time, collaborators in the project, wouldn't have been possible without them. Kim Hill, Magdi Hurtado, and Hillard Kaplan. We were looking at people who know what they're doing when they're living on wild foods. And what we found was that guys vary in how good they are as hunters, but the guys who are most successful at it, the better hunters, spend more time hunting, and everybody knows who got whatever it is we're eating, but he doesn't own it. He doesn't own the meat. He's not even the one that distributes it, and his wife and kids don't get any special share. So what the heck is, what's going on? What is going on with those guys? And so maybe what they are after is reputations. If they are known to be good hunters, then that shifts everybody's attitude toward them. Well, then I was so lucky to be invited by Nick Blurton Jones, as was my then also at Utah, my collaborator, Jim O'Connell, to join him in this project he was starting in East Africa with Hadza folks. Now, this is, a part of the world where not only do we have this amazing array of enormous herbivores and their carnivore predators, but it's also the place where we have this deep record of the paleoanthropology and of our evolution. So how do they do it? What's going on? And of course, my central question at the time, and actually each one of us had slightly different obsessions at the time, but mine was what's going on with the guys. And luckily, O'Connell, who is an archaeologist, was especially interested in what's going on with the archaeology. So because that was his focus, he recorded what happened with every single big animal that was taken during our times in the field. What actually happened, where it ended up at the kill sites, what goes on at the butchering stands, who carries what back to the residential base, what happens there, all those things. And these guys are amazingly successful hunters and aggressive scavengers. In fact, really, because the animals are so big, they're on average, they get twice as much as the Aceh hunters do. But the thing is, these are enormous, these animals. So that giraffe in the photograph here, you can't say, I'm hungry for giraffe, I think I'll go get a kilo. You can't get a kilo. You have to take the whole giraffe, and whoa, that is a ton of meat, 1,000 kilos. And what happens is everybody except the littlest kids comes to the kill site, eats as much as they can, and then because it's so big and they can't eat it all, they carry a whole lot of it back to the residential base. Now, these guys are using technology that archaeologists associate with the, late in the Upper Pleistocene. So they've got those. If we go back further, technology wouldn't have been as good. And yet, even with those powerful bows and arrows, our data showed that if we look at the failure rate, it's so high. So the average chance of getting a big animal, and these guys go every day, is less than 5%. So if we're just talking about the stats, failure is what you should expect every day. And on average, it's once a month. Well, that's no way to feed the kids. And the contrast with what goes on with our great ape cousins is really central to everything I'm trying to put on the table here. And so what we saw was the same thing James Woodburn saw, who started working with these folks in the 50s, the 1950s. And the women and kids go off, and the foods that they focus on, they can't fail. There's so much there. And the thing that is really striking about what characterizes the annual round is that the staple all year is these underground storage organs, these tubers, and the little kids are not big enough to be able to get enough to actually feed themselves. And people were so amazing. They let us weigh them. And so was a small sample, but we weighed everybody. I wish we'd done more of it. But anyway, the data showed that the weaned kids were depending on their mom's work until she has a new baby. And it's not that she stops foraging, so that the woman in the photograph is still digging, and there's her son waiting waiting for that to happen, but she has a new baby. And that means she's got other stuff going on. And the correlation between mom's work and the weight gains of their weaned kids went away. And then the correlation was with their grandmother. And there's another woman with a new baby, and that's her mother who's preparing her tools to go off to work. And they're the grandkids eager for her to do that. So here is a story, and this is kind of a complicated slide, but all of these things going on, because when you're digging these things, actually, if you're next to somebody, you gain from that, because you have to dig the hole, and somebody doing it next to you, you open it up faster. And taking these things, you do in batches. You don't take them one handful at a time. And that figure on the left is meant to show in general how these things work. And of course, if we're talking about cooking, which is we are in this case, then the cooking fire, you can cook all kinds of tubers on the same fire. So what we saw was that the older women were adding to the pile of food, but they're not adding new stomachs. So their subsidies are actually supporting the women who are still fertile, still having babies, to have that next baby sooner. Now, Goodall had told us a lot of these things. So here is a direct quote from her 86 book. Chimpanzee mothers of youngsters in their 4th or 5th years refuse requests for items that the child can acquire himself. Some consistently refuse to share with a 3-year-old even those foods that are virtually impossible for the child to obtain otherwise. And she also, in the 86 book, said, I'm guessing that old age begins at about 33. And she went on to say, in a footnote, few survive to be placed in that category. So grandmother hypothesis should have been staring us in the face. And what you're seeing now are models of the female half of the age structure for chimpanzees I guess we're looking at the same thing. So on the left, and humans, Hadza representing us on the right, and each one of those bars is a 5-year age class, and the orange bars at the bottom, these are the immature, the girls who aren't going to have a baby yet, or the female chimpanzees that don't have a baby yet. Those green bars are the fertile years. And then in the case of humans, those golden years. And the photographs, well, you see the chimpanzees, the social relationships between mom and her kids is important to everybody, but they are all feeding themselves, except for the one who still is depending on her milk. But the weaned ones get their own lunch, dinner, and snacks. So then I was so lucky to have Peter Kim, who is a mathematical biologist, get interested in this question. Of course, I can say, and we'll try not to say much more about that right now, but if you want to ask questions, please do. But Peter was, the question was, well, okay, there's a story, but, could it really happen that way? So taking our assumptions, but making it both sexes, because after all, we are sexual reproducers, and building a two-sex agent-based model, what he showed is now let's put both the boys and the girls, the males and the females, and the blue bars, again using Hadza to represent us, and the green bars are chimpanzees, and the brackets are showing the fertile ages. Well, in chimpanzees, the sex ratio in the fertile ages is female biased with all kinds of consequences for going for each possible paternity you can. Not so for us. It is the case that the male bias in the fertile ages is really marked. All those old guys are still producing sperm at an astonishing rate. And I know this is a complicated slide, so walk through it with me, but please feel free to ask questions later. If we're trying to use evolutionary life history theory, we talk about these continuing trade-offs. We live in a finite world. Everybody does. More into one thing means less into something else. And this trade-off between what goes into reproduction and what goes into continuing to grow, maintain, repair the eventually parental organism, those things trade off against each other. And the reproduction, well, if we had time, and we're going to talk about not all of these things, but what goes into that somatic category is not only growth, but then maintenance and repair. So all kinds of issues around senescence. But reproduction is not only what goes into parenting, but also that trades off against what goes into mating. And Darwin talked about this before the origin. He talked about it in The Origin of Species, and he thought it was important enough to write a whole book about it. Sexual selection, competition for mates. And he talked about these two kinds of aspects of mating competition, sexual selection. There is direct competition for mating opportunities, which is, as he said, often male-male competition, so armaments, or, on the other hand, female choice, being more beautiful ornaments so that you are more likely to be chosen. On the parenting side, of course, there are trade-offs again. Do you have fewer offspring and put more into each one? Or do you have lots and lots of them, and so you can't put very much into each of them? Well, the thing is, in the 20th century, Darwin didn't understand inheritance much as he tried. He didn't have the tools. But by the 20th century, I'm tempted to say more, I'm trying to resist, but we now have especially W.D. Hamilton pointing out that actually what's going on between parents and offspring is just a special case of something much more general, because of course, you get half your genes from mom and half your genes from dad, but half of mom's genes came from her mom and half from her dad. And so all of these other places you are sharing genes, and that has consequences for what selection favors. And it's really central to what I'm trying to put on the table here. Now, Matthew Chan was a postdoc with Peter Kim. Once again, it's not only that Peter is this amazing mathematical biologist, but he had these students and postdocs who also got interested in the question. And this is a figure from a paper that Matthew is the first author on, and trying to get at this issue of sexual conflict, which had emerged as a thing in other modeling. And he found a way as a mathematician to try to visualize the fitness landscape from the perspective of males, from the perspective of females, as well as the two-sex fitness landscape. So if you look at the dotted line, the dotted blue line, the vertical line, that is marking the optimal two-sex fitness landscape without subsidies coming from grandmothering. For example, what we see in chimpanzees, or again, the other living hominids. And then the optimal adult life expectancy is right there, which is more or less what it looks like in the data that we have. But if we consider what happens when there are subsidies coming from the older females, when postmenopausal longevity, lengthening it is favored, then we have that yellow, gold, whatever we should call that color, line, arrow in the center, the vertical one. And you can see that that is where things would go if the female optimum were favored. Yes, adult life expectancy would be longer. There would be more postmenopausal longevity. But actually, look at that green line that just keeps going up and up. That is the male fitness landscape, because you could always get another paternity, and it is actually the male advantage for even greater longevity that pulls the two-sex fitness landscape with grandmothering to that blue line, which is just about what we see in people who are living as foragers with the kind of mortality that characterizes those circumstances. And, here are some actual data, again, back to the Aceh and the Hadza, the top. And I've tried to line up the ages, because on the horizontal axis, we're talking about age. And what Kim and Magdi reported in their Aceh life history book was the age-specific fertility of Aceh men and women while in the forest. And there you can see that females start having babies before males start getting any paternities. But by the age that female fertility is ending, well, there's still all those old guys that are getting paternities. And it's the same way for the Hadza. Those are Nick's data. That's one of the figures in his book, Demography and Evolutionary Ecology of Hadza Hunter-Gatherers. And they both the analysts reported the cumulative number of paternities by age for their subjects. And there I've put that red line to mark when female fertility ends. Well, look at all those older guys who are still getting paternities. And because there can't be any more paternities than there are babies, the ones they get, the younger guys can't get. So there are all those guys between the ages of 15 and, above the age of 15 that aren't getting any. That's because the older guys are out competing them. And boy, did we see, again, there's that figure showing these fertile ages, and they're marking menopause, because now we have some real quantitative data showing that actually the age of menopause is essentially the same in chimpanzees as it is in us. But what goes on with the males is competing to show your stuff, especially to the other guys. And in our Hadza data set that, remember, O'Connell was paying attention to every single case of getting a large animal. And in almost 2/3 of them, there were lions or hyenas still on the carcass. But these guys, the Hadza guys, always drove them off, sometimes not fast enough. There was one occasion when the lion didn't move fast enough and we had lion for dinner. But Nick also pursued this question further in his complicated demographic analysis. And so the top figure is showing the fraction married at each age. So yes, pair bonds are a big deal. They are in humans generally, but they are not usually for life. And that is the case for the Hadza. So if you look at those ages when you might be thinking those are the ages when most people are married, about 20% at any time of the folks are not married, both men and women. And then when we get to ages where women aren't fertile, well, then fewer and fewer of them are married. You don't have to be married to the guy to eat his meat. Some of those old guys are still married, and the figure on the bottom shows another important analysis that Nick did. Look at the guys who are just average hunters. They don't have a special reputation. And then the guys who are known to be real experts. And the thing is, the guys who have reputations as really good hunters, they tend to not only remarry faster, but to always a younger wife. So they are married most of their adulthood and progressively to younger and younger wives. And so they end up having way more paternities, not because their kids survive better, but because they have more of them. So this thing about having the sex ratio and the mating age is male biased already, that makes mate guarding the advantage, grab her, claim her, make this proprietary claim, she is mine. And then the guys who are known to be good hunters, who you want to, okay, yeah, I want to be on your good side, that reputation earns the tendency for other men to defer to those guys. And so we've got in foraging populations all here, I'm using 3 different continents, mate guarding, reputation building, and the Yaowarat, that's Central Australia, so there's a whole story about that. But anyway, mate guarding plus reputation building always puts the old guys ahead, and that means recurrent, persistent patriarchy. But where did this reputation thing come from? To get at that, let's go back to where we started with the contrast between us and our closest cousins. Remember all that independent mothering that they do, and the fact that the babies actually start getting their own solid food. Mom's carrying them along, they're still nursing, but in addition, they're getting their own food by the time of their first birthday. Well, right. Not the case for us. And so the story that I've been telling is that when the climate change broke up the ancient African tropical forest, and our ancestors were drawn to these savanna foods, and the staples youngsters can't really manage, but grandmothers can. And that means the ones that were aging more slowly could be more economically productive, and that means they could subsidize shorter birth intervals for the still fertile females. And aging more slowly also means you can afford to develop more slowly and make a more elaborate apparatus before you stop and become an adult. And the thing that I want to start with is this crucial distinctive evolutionary intersection between slower development and shorter birth intervals that characterizes us. And that has real consequences for mother that Sarah Hrdy has been talking about, since the last century. So persuasively and effectively with her comparative data. All of these kids stacking up dependence is a very distinctive thing that we do. And it means that allocation problems for our moms are really different than they are for the other living hominids, but also, especially, or also maybe, even more important is the consequences for infants. And boy, do we see it, that the survival of our infants depends on their managing somehow to get mom back or somebody, because if they're not subsidized, it's curtains for them. Survival depends on that. And we talk about human infants being altricial or helpless, but socially so precocious. The cover photographs on the right these are developmental psychologists who, it's such an interesting problem, even if it's not, it's not the evolution, how did we get here, but just what's going on. And Vasudevi Reddy, especially, her talking about the flirtatiousness of human babies is so striking. And so now we got to put some more pieces in here. The slower development means bigger. We are bigger. And now looking at across the primates, across our order, the biggest to the smallest, a female gorilla, she's really big. 100,000 grams, and the smallest is a mouse lemur, barely 100 grams. So the gorilla, is 1,000 times bigger, and it took her to her 10th birthday to get there, whereas the mouse lemur got to be an adult in about a year and started having lots and lots of babies. But it's also a correlated feature is that the gorilla female, she's bigger, she has a bigger brain than the little mouse lemur, but where her body is 1,000 times bigger, her brain is only 250 times bigger. And that allometry, that scaling, interested Harry Jarrison starting in the 1960s, what's going on with brains. And this is a figure of his from 1963, which is often reprinted. And notice where it's logged on both the vertical scale for brain weight and the horizontal scale for body weight. So you can put this huge range of variation into a sort of manageable range. And the straight line is the non-primate mammals. So bigger body, brain is bigger. But then the primates are all above that. And Jarrison thought, well, that, we're kind of a brainy bunch, us primates, that must be measuring something important. And he talked about what he called the encephalization quotient. So if we could somehow subtract the part that, you got a bigger body, so maybe you need a bigger brain to just manage it. But then the part that is beyond that must be measuring something else. And he also noticed that the brain itself, the components of the brain scales. The bigger the brain, the larger fraction is neocortex. And so back to this idea that it's our bigger brains and that made ancestral males better hunters and they could support their wives and kids. And so we piled up the babies and, so on. But it was Barbara Finlay who, cognitive neuroscientist, who was so interested in, wait a minute, what's actually going on developmentally? And in 1995, Finlay and Richard Darlington published a paper in which they started not at birth, but not at conception, because all kinds of stuff has gone on before birth. And anyway, across the mammals, birth moves around. And they noted that if you look at these brain components, the difference in the structure sizes is huge, more than 100,000-fold differences in size. And the size of those structures scales with the total brain size. And in that sample, they had 7 different species and 51 subdivisions of the brain. And they noted that the developmental order is what determines structure size. The things that finish last are largest. And they even explained why there, but which we can talk about, or other things. There's so much to talk about. By 2013, Finlay and her colleagues now had 18 taxa, and now they had more than, 271 developmental events. And once again, we're using log scale, which is always tricky if you don't think about that all the time. But the days post-conception on a log scale is the vertical here, and then this maturational progress scale. And here are, they pulled out these 5 species to show the range, and to get to the same place in brain development that a mouse gets to in about 30 days, it takes a human 1,000 days. It is the duration of development that determines the whole brain size and the structure size. And here, now, adding some more events, but now looking at weaning and comparing primates to non-primate mammals, but we're especially interested in the living hominids, us, and here included chimpanzees and orangutans. And remember, this is a log scale, so it's the slope that's so crucial. It's showing how slow it is or fast in going through time. And what is so striking is how early we wean our babies. And Finlay, I hope you can read that. I have something in the way on my screen. Can you? I hope this is, I'm quoting Barb. I wonder if I can just move that out of my way. Can I? No, I can't. Anyway, belief that our neocortex is exceptional, and now these are her words, has, I can't quite see it, but it's confused or misled both neuroscientists and psychologists to assign all kinds of functions to the frontal cortex that are actually distributed widely in the brain, and to neglect the genuinely novel features of human infancy and childhood. So what's going on here? There we go. So trying to put all this together now, this thing that goes on in infancy, that it is so important to us in gauging relationships. And what do you think of me? Well, am I not just cute as can be? And what do I think of you? And all of that is such a big deal, even though motorically, human babies they can't do anything. Chimpanzees can run circles around them at the same age. But that priority to reputations is a thing that then continues lifelong. And what then happens is, how is this? Am I doing the right thing? Is this, how do I fit in here? Am I doing it right? Is this how we do it? Okay, yeah, that's how we do it. Yeah, that's how we do it. Oh, not them. They don't do it that way. And this us versus them thing, which has, look around, all these consequences that make us so dangerous to each other and everything else on the planet. But it also is fundamental to things that we cherish in being human, that are we on the same page? Are we getting this the same way? Can we, we're on the same team. Joy of shared projects, all those things. And that's actually what brings us here, you guys that are still with me. And of course, isn't it cool to be trying to figure this out? So I really am eager to see what part of that doesn't seem to make sense. So I guess I will stop sharing my screen and have I done that? Have I stopped sharing? You guys can tell me. Did I?
I can still see it. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I have to go back there. Stop sharing. Oh, what happened? It was there and then it went away. Stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That's gone. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting talk. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. I've got the chat open, so I'll monitor that. But yeah, people feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question out loud. You've already got a hand raised from Adeline. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me fine?
Yes. Yeah.
Hello. Well,
hello.
Thank you very much for the talk. It was very fascinating. First is you show a bunch of books. Do you have one particular to recommend, or maybe one you wrote yourself summarizing all that? Because I mean, it was very interesting, and I'm sure I will forget half the things in tomorrow. So, and I'd like to dive. So I don't know. First question is like, do you have something to recommend?
Well, as I said to Rachel and others, I'm trying to put all this together in one place in a recent paper. So it's not a book, but I absolutely, you will find it all there and all the evidence, all the citations. So if you have any appetite for scientific papers, then please look at my 2025 paper, Revisiting Grandmothers and Human Longevity. So I had a paper in 2003 that had that title, Grandmothers and Human Longevity. And that was in 2003. And then I was invited to revisit it. And I would love to, because now there's so much more to say. And so that paper is one I would definitely recommend. And so did I give you enough clues in what I said?
I think so. Yeah, I think
right.
I
mean, one of the books that I gave a lot of attention to is Herdy's 99 book. So that's a long time ago. I still use it in classes because she talks about the intellectual history in ways that are really useful. And really, the last third of it is all of this stuff about infancy. Of course, there's way more evidence now. In fact, just within the last couple of months, these papers have come out. There was this wonderful thing in the New York Times with all these giggling babies, and I wanted to snatch that because it's just they're just giggling. They're so cute. They're so doing it, you know. And then there have been a couple of papers coming out recently on people looking at infants and the way they tease and all the things they do. So again, developmental psychologists like Alison Gopnik, and then I mentioned Vasudevi Reddy. Those people have been interested in this thing about human babies. It's Sarah Herdy who has put together, because she's a primatologist, so it was the comparative stuff that drew her in initially to the question. So sorry, I always give answers that are way too long. Thank you, though, for the question.
That was great. Yeah, at least I have some reading list. And the second question was, then what about matriarchy? Do you have some insight on how come they exist then? Like, is there a difference in social structure, ecology, foods, like?
Well, what I would say is when there's matrilineal social organization where you get your membership in the clan or something through your mom. Is that the kind of thing you mean? Actually, when you look closely at what we know from ethnography, it turns out that still the politics is largely run by the boys. So it turns out that it's mother's brother. And so the relationship with mother's brother turns out to be so important for sister's son. And I mean, there's all kinds of classic ethnography about this kind of thing. The Trobriand Islands are an especially classic site of ethnography because Bronislaw Malinowski was marooned there in the First World War. He was an ethnographer working there, and then the war came, and so he couldn't leave. And so he actually, the title of a book, which at the time, this is a time when anthropology was on the, I don't know, bookshelves in, bus stations and so on. The title of a book is The Sexual Life of Savages, for heaven's sake. But he has all these accounts of talking to his Trobriand friends. And there, the social organization is matrilineal. You get your clan membership, and clan membership is associated with all kinds of things through your mother. And he was trying to tell his Trobriand friends, actually, the way this works is, both parents, it takes, he probably didn't know the biology in detail, but he knew a Western notion that there is one mother, one father. And his Trobriand, the guys he was talking to would say, that makes no sense at all. I mean, I look at all these kids who are having sex, and those girls aren't getting pregnant, and look at old what's her name? She's so ugly, and she has kids. And I was away for 2 years working to try and make some money, and I came back, and my wife had a baby. So anyway, so matriarchy is not something we actually see ethnographically. Matrilineality, yes. But once again, when it comes to community politics, for the most part, in most cases, that tends to be, stuff going on among the men and boys. I'll just shut up there because, of course, I could say so much more.
Thank you. It's a very thorough answer. Yeah. Walter, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. And thank you for calling on me. This is more of a biological question. Have you and other investigators noticed a paternal age effect in older, chimps and apes who father children, and also has a maternal age effect? Has that been noticed? In humans, a good example of a paternal age effect would be the birth of a child with trisomy 21, fathered by a male who is, let's say, over 40 years old. Right. And perhaps older women who are 40 plus may have spontaneous miscarriages. That's in we Homo sapiens. Have you noticed any of that in Pang, chimps and the bonobos?
Well, Walter, thank you so much for the question. And the kind of answer I would give is, first of all, look at the age structure of the other living hominids, right? So as Goodall says, old age begins at about 33 in chimpanzees, and very few live to be put in that category. Well, now we have data from Ngogo, which is a chimpanzee site, amazing data from there. And there are some females who are older. And so actually in that population, they have actual measurements, hormonal measurements of showing menopause looks and showing that the age-specific fertility essentially ends at about the same place it does in us. Although, again, when we talk about these averages, as you probably know, there always are outliers. I mean, there was within the last year or so, wasn't there a woman who was in her 60s who had her 13th child or something? Good heavens. So even though fertility really asymptotes close to zero in us, there's a distribution around that. But this paternal age effect has been a matter of interest recently because this thing about producing new sperm every day through adulthood means there are all those turnovers, all that opportunity for, deleterious mutations of various kinds. And so with big data sets, there is evidence of paternal age effects. For the foraging populations, we don't have anything like sample sizes that would show something like that. And in fact, there are all kinds of issues around, well, never mind. I'll just stop there. And thank you for the question. And please take it anywhere you like from what I said. What additional stuff would you say? Yeah, the thing about, I have actually written about that, trying to compare, because there were a lot of people looking for similarities in menopause in women and people who were working with captive chimpanzees and trying to track what was going on. Similarities are there, yes, for females. I mean, one of the problems, so I was so influenced by a particular evolutionary biologist who really turned me into an evolutionary biologist. And a lot of his modeling and trying to figure out what's going on across the mammals with all these life history differences focused just on females, because data on who's your daddy, for the most part, for so many mammalian populations that began to be tracked, the data were way better on females. And, it is very tricky to be sure you've actually, who the dad is. Now, there are a lot of ways in which field primatologists talk about how all I do is walk around collecting pee and poop because you can get DNA out of it, and then you can see who's related to whom and what males are having the most paternities. Sorry, again. Do you want to say more, Walter?
No, I was just, very curious about, the quality of spermatozoa in aging, chimps and gorillas, and also the ability for the females to carry a pregnancy all the way through parturition. There are different stresses on females and males.
For some reason, it looks like my, whoa, not now. Oh dear. And I don't have him on the phone. So my computer guy wants to get into my computer right now. He doesn't know. I'm in a not allow right now. Don't do this. Sorry. I guess he'll take the hint. But yeah, I know. I mean, now we have big samples and are measuring these things. It's too bad. Henry Harpending was in my department until actually he died, and he was a very influential geneticist, among other things. And one of the things he was especially interested in was paternal age effects, especially because he had a son at a very advanced age and wondered about that. And I don't know, there are people who pull together these data sets from our, I don't know what to call it, our socioecology, Al Pacino having a kid at whatever advanced age. Anyway, so there are all these examples of strikingly older men in our socioecology fathering kids, and follow on, when you have an N of when you have a small n, it's always tricky, as you probably would agree.
So I just wanted to add that Charles Darwin and his wife probably had the result of paternal age effect in two of their children. They married when they were both, I believe, Darwin was 29, his wife was almost 30, and they had, I believe, 9 children together, and 3 or so died in childhood and infancy. But their last child really had a failure to thrive and died very, very young. Maybe he had medical science was not that advanced, but it sounds like he did not have trisomy, maybe some sort of metabolic disease, an aminoaciduria or myopathy. Nobody really knows. And a child before that also did very poorly and may have had trisomy 21. I think it was their 6th or 7th child. So it's just something to think about.
I didn't know that, and fascinating. I completely agree. And Darwin got very interested in got very interested in little kids. And well, again, what an amazing shelf it is. What he did in the middle of the 19th century. It's just wow, so incredible.
Can I just jump in with a question from the chat just to make sure that we get to hear it? We've got one from Chris. He asks, I wonder if we know much about the phenotypic plasticity of menopause, and linked to this, are we seeing anything interesting from the savanna chimps?
I'm sorry, I was just trying to get this out of the way so I could see you, Rachel. Say that one more time.
Yep. I wonder if we know much about the phenotypic plasticity of menopause, and linked to this, are we seeing anything interesting from the savanna chimps?
Well, again, there is a paper reporting these data from Ngogo and comparing in that I actually have I could show the figure from that paper, which compares age-specific fertility at Ngogo to other non-Ngogo chimpanzee wild sites, and they're essentially the same. And again, they have hormonal data from Ngogo showing the markers of menopause in these Ngogo females. So yes, it's very plastic in us. Actually, a paper several years ago, I tried to pull together some of that because all these things, when we use averages, it's like we're missing so much. And yet, if we don't simplify and focus on, a particular question, then, the infinite variety of the world prevents us from seeing what are crucial patterns we want to try and capture and understand, but always knowing the averages are problematic. And of course, with something like menopause, the way it's been, quote, measured is so tricky. So Lynette Leidy-Sievert has written about that in particular, the way in which, depending on how you measure menopause in a population, you get a different answer. The World Health Organization says it's menopause a year after your last menstrual period. Well, how many people can identify that? And then so there are different ways of measuring it, and but there is clearly age at last birth is another thing that varies substantially, even if we talk about, quote, natural fertility populations. The age at last birth is notably variable among women. But again, the average, essentially, fertility ends before 50. But again, that 65-year-old mom having her 13th child, good heavens. Anyway, do we know about, remember the age structure for I was showing those figures for chimpanzees, and you don't have the ages that you have in us. And you have these ages. Here is a postmenopausal woman, you know, and we're all over the place in human populations. In foraging populations, you know, it's so easy to misunderstand this. I mean, it's a thing I often think I need to put into a talk, because life expectancy, the standard meaning is the whole thing. And that means that it's the average of the length of lives of a whole bunch of folks who are all born at the same time. And if there are a lot of dying babies and kids, well, then that really pulls the average down. So in places where fertility is low and there aren't that many babies to die, then that has effects on life expectancy. But the thing that, so for example, I mean, there is a wonderful, very influential, as it should be, paper, Jim Open and Jim Vopel from, I think, 2000. Again, I would show the figure in which they show if it's life expectancy you're measuring, and they took worldwide samples of, you know, what country where they actually have annual census stuff, what country is the winner for maximum life expectancy. And they start in about 1845, and the winner in that year is Sweden. And actually, you can look up the mortality figures for Sweden in that winning year in 1845. And there are a whole bunch of postmenopausal women, even though life expectancy is, you know, I can't remember now, 40 maybe, but that's the average. But again, for the other hominids, this category of demography, you know, female years lived usually does not include many years that are, quote, postmenopausal. But in us, in foraging populations, it's about a third of the adult women that are past their fertility. So big effect on human populations when postmenopausal longevity increases. And the story I am telling is consistent with the data that I know, is favored very much by selection. And I've talked about a pathway for that, which has all these other effects, for heaven's sake, because you got these short birth intervals and you got all these old men who are still producing sperm. Anyway, that's the world we live in.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I couldn't believe how much was in that paper, actually. I did the grandmother hypothesis in like undergrad, and that was a few years ago. And then the 2025 summary that you sent us was just like, wow, all this other stuff is linked to it. There's so much, it's crazy. Well, we have gone past the hour. Yeah, we have gone past the hour, so I guess we should end. I'll just read you a couple of comments that you got in the chat. Just people being very complimentary, saying it was a fantastic talk. Thank you very much, and that it was wonderfully explained. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us at this slightly later time of day.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you again, Professor
Thank you
Hawkes,
for the questions. And of course, I'm always eager to hear more questions. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah. No, thank you for coming. This was really, really great. Thanks, everyone. I think we'll end it there then. Okay. Bye.
Bye.